Here's another potential symptom.
Sure.
Do we view our success in God by our financial reward? Can God bless us in ways other than monetarily?
Right.
If God asks us to do something and we're struggling through a trial, okay, or we're being persecuted for what we believe,
Right.
do we say to ourselves, well, God must not be in this because I'm not seeing the benefit of it financially or otherwise?
Right.
What I guess I'm driving at is we cannot let our circumstances dictate God's love.
Right. Right. So, for example, something, people say, okay, great, you're trusting God, you launch in,
Yes.
you're being obedient, but then you're in a period of trial or struggle or reproach.
Correct.
And they say, well, obviously God's not in this because
Yes.
this isn't here.
Be careful.
Be careful.
Very careful, because what God wants to do, again, through putting us through a trial or test is refine our character.
Okay.
And if we're not willing, if everything came delivered on arrival, it wouldn't be faith, right? If there wasn't a hope of something to happen in the future, then it wouldn't be called faith. So we have to not be too quick to say, this didn't work because I didn't have the money I thought I was going to have.
Right, right. And that puts us in a real position of humility with ourselves in situations like that aren't working out right away.
Right.
We can say, well, this could very well be part of the process, but we also have to say, well, is this really the Lord? We need to
Absolutely.
use discernment, but also with other people. If someone is having difficulty financially, that doesn't mean that they've wandered from God.
Yes.
In fact, they could be right where God wants them to be.
That's right.
And so we need to
Absolutely
exercise discernment and be careful when we
Yes.
speak to other people, when we counsel them, not to counsel them away from doing the very thing God has them to do,
right.
and the trial that he has them in for a specific purpose.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons Jesus said don't judge is because we don't know why somebody's going through what they might be going through.
Right.
Now, we may be given discernment by God, that's another matter, but the point is, you can only know by relationship and communion with the Lord as to whether or not you're on track or not.
Right.
What we can't do is basically tell God, it can only happen if this, if that, if I have this amount of money or this, we have to be very careful if we're sort of making these demands. If the very thing God wants to unplug us from is the dependency on the demand.
I have
Sure.
a story I want to tell about my son, Gabriel. And he just has an incredible level of faith. He's 8 years old. He has an incredible level of faith for God's provision because
Yes.
we've been growing up in a way where he's seen God provide over and over and over. In fact, some days I'll come home and I might express some discouragement about something, and Gabriel will be like, "Daddy, we're just following God, and we have to trust Him, and He's gonna do whatever."
Which is great.
He knows he's a man of faith, even though he's a young man.
Love that.
But on our drive home last week, we were at the baseball game.
Yes.
We had a little father-son time, and we're reflecting
Yes.
on the trip. And for some reason, he starts talking about money, and he says to me, "Daddy, we're not really rich, but we're not poor either." He says, "We're with God." We're not rich, we're not poor,
Right.
we're with God. He was reflecting on what kind of people are we? We're
Right.
people who are with God.
Yes.
And so I think that's the thing. When we're with God, that's the big thing. We might have extreme wealth, we might be in what the world would call poverty, but we're with God, and so we're going to have enough. We're going to have what we need. That's the
Yes.
economy of the kingdom, where God is never taken out of the equation. He's always a part
Yes.
of the equation.
Absolutely. And I go back to Paul saying, whether I abase or I abound, I still acknowledge God and pursue after him.
Right.
And I think that's critical. The other example that I was thinking about as a symptom potentially of a problem of being plugged in is taking promises of God about money, for example, or about blessing, for example.
Sure.
And trying to contort them into our own control. So I sometimes use this analogy of God as the ATM. He's the ATM God. So God says in his word, I will reward a generous giver, and you'll reap what you sow. It's very clear that as we give to others and we give, God gives to us. But if we somehow make this a formula and God an ATM, where, I have a financial problem, so if I have a financial problem that $1,000 cash money will solve, I'm going to give $100 cash money into the ATM of God, and out will pop my $1,000 from this ATM of God.
So that's not how God views things, I'm guessing.
So God has his promises, and they are true. And he wants to add no sorrow to the abound and blessing of wealth and health and goodness. But when God says and makes a promise to us that if you do this, if you obey me in these areas, I will reward you in these areas. What he's not trying to do is eliminate him from the picture.
Right.
He's not trying to give us a mechanism where we can basically control our destiny and say, God gave me the secret formula. If I give this and I get that, thank you very much, God. Let me just, I'll get what I need this way. That's not really trusting God.
Right.
And we've got to remember there's nothing biblically that says, if you give money, I will give you back money.
Right.
If you give in this way, I will give you in that way. What it says instead is, if you're generous, I will be generous with you.
And I'm going to reward you. But we don't get to say how that reward is going to come.
What is the reward, and when does it come, and how much it will be, and so forth.
Right.
We're given guidance, but one of the symptoms of do we have a problem, are we an alcoholic, if you will, of money, is are we demanding that God does it in a certain way?
Right.
And are we taking relationship out of that equation?